Hi, everybody. Another video for you. I'm going to try to put out a few of these as quickly as I can. Developments around the world are changing quite rapidly. And I don't think that there are a lot of people doing great analysis, to be perfectly honest with you. I have spent a year and a half, almost 2 years, basically not doing videos or podcasts or anything. And looking around, I find I don't know, the analysis is kind of lacking from a lot of people. I mean, there's some good people out there, of course, doing good work, but um, I find myself hating the formats, hating short videos, short form, hating the AI stuff, and just looking for real people with real analysis and real ideas. And I don't know, hopefully that's me. Hopefully you think that that's valuable. Um, in any event, Eric Draitser on Patreon. That is where you can go and find all of this stuff. You can support my work, etc. Anyway, I don't want to do too much promotion here. I want to focus on some key issues. I'm going to do some videos in the coming hours, days about Israel's transformation. I mean, I've talked about it for years. Israel becoming a fascist society, Israel's process of fascistization that it has undergone over the last 30 plus years. That's something that really deserves some careful uh, discussion, some careful analysis. I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk about Russia as well. Russia is going to end up making out quite well in all of this debacle in the Middle East. So we will talk about those in coming videos. I have some other subjects I want to focus on, but for today, for right now, I want to talk about shipping. Now, I know I'm not the first person to point out the fact that this conflict is undoubtedly endangering global trade, the Strait of Hormuz, etc. It is the one of the lead stories on every financial channel and every website and so forth. So I'm not breaking any ground here, but I feel like most of the discussion around the Strait of Hormuz and around the global economic costs and ripple effects of this war, I feel like it misses so many of the really key elements here. So let's just break it down for a few minutes. The Strait of Hormuz is, of course, not going to be, new knowledge for anybody watching this video. It is probably the most important or one of the two most important choke points in the world for global trade. So much of the global energy and other sectors goes through the Strait of Hormuz. Europe depends on it for much of its trade. Asia depends on the Strait of Hormuz to get its goods to Western markets and vice versa. So, again, I don't think I need to spend too much time explaining the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz. It is central to the entire functioning of the global economy. So, what's going through there? I just want to point out a couple of items, a couple of products that you should be aware of because it's more than just oil. So, anyway, we'll start at the top, of course, with oil. Oil going through the Strait of Hormuz from markets to the energy starved markets in Europe, etc. This is almost goes without saying. The price of oil has so far remained fairly steady. I haven't checked it today, but the increases that we have seen have been mostly in the in the realm of like oil prices to Europe, for example. I'm not going to get into all of the delineations between the various hydrocarbons products and so forth. Suffice to say that U.S. oil is more or less stable. Oil that is going to other markets, not so much. That's for now. This conflict is days old. What's the price of oil going to look like several weeks from now when this conflict drags on, as it inevitably will? What's that going to look like? Will we be at $100 a barrel? I think that's fairly reasonable, but $100 a barrel is not crazy. We saw $100 a barrel oil not that many years ago. But how much further could it go? How long, with the Strait of Hormuz shut down or with shipping going through there at a minimal level? How long until 120, 150, 180? dollars a barrel becomes not just wild imagination, but becomes the reality. At what point will those gas prices at the pump prices, which inevitably flow from the oil price, how long until those start reaching up into the $3.50, $4.50 a gallon range again? These are the kinds of things that lose elections in the United States, for example. So, in any case, oil, of course, is a major, major issue, major good that goes through commodity, I should say, that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. But there's also gas, liquefied natural gas, LNG. The Qataris have announced that they have shut down their facilities there, their refining facilities there. They are no longer able to produce gas, at least not while there's the threat of Iranian missiles and or drones. Now, Qatar is an interesting case here because Qatar, and I'll get into this when we talk more about Russia, but Qatar was basically the linchpin of the entire European strategy after Russia invaded Ukraine, the entire European strategy to get away from Russian gas. How do you move away from Russian gas? Well, you import it from Qatar. But what happens when that gas isn't there anymore? What happens when Qatar can't provide that gas anymore? What happens to European politics when they have to look east once again and they see the smiling, sniveling face of Putin laughing at them as they come crawling back to him, begging him to give them a good price? What's that going to do to the politics in Europe? What's that going to do to the economic situation there? There's no way to get that Qatari gas to Europe. There ain't no pipeline, folks. There's no pipeline. It all has to go through the Strait of Hormuz. So, there is no plan B for Europe when it comes to LNG, to the gas. Now the Russians, for their part, have a tremendous degree of leverage here. They don't have to sell the gas to the Europeans. In fact, that's what Putin has been signaling recently. So much more leverage on the part of Russia, much decrease in leverage on the part of Qatar, and of course also of the other players in the Middle East. Riyadh, for example, the Saudis, they're not really able to ship their oil, at least not in the amounts that they would like, not in the amounts that they're accustomed to keep their economy afloat. They have to move all of the oil over to the western coast, into to the Red Sea, to other ports. But capacity is already strained. So the Saudis are also going to lose here. So oil, liquefied natural gas, well, oil products, also the LNG. That's one aspect of this. But what about agriculture? The Strait of Hormuz is critical to the flow of agricultural goods and all of the raw materials that are required for agricultural production. So remember back a couple of years when Russia invaded Ukraine and we were talking about famine in Africa, famine in other parts of the world if that Ukrainian wheat couldn't make it to the global markets. Well, supply chains were shifted and other things were other deals were made and so forth. So most of the negative impact of that was mitigated. There was that deal that the Russians and the Ukrainians were able to broker. I believe it was with Turkey mediating to allow for some of those exports to go out of the Black Sea and so forth. Anyway, I bring that up for context because a disruption at this time of the year, because remember, the Russians invaded Ukraine also in the end of February. Okay, so almost the exact same time of the year, a disruption at precisely this moment when the winter is coming to a close, when planting season is coming. This is a disaster for global agricultural output and for global, food supply. But it's not just the finished products, of course, because it's not that we're looking at harvests coming in now. We're looking at planting. So that means agricultural products like fertilizer, which also is so heavily dependent upon the Strait of Hormuz. What happens if urea fertilizer and other forms of fertilizer can't make it to their customers? Customers can't plant. Well, what happens if they can't plant? Well, they can't survive, number one, and neither can you or I, because the food supply comes into question. Tremendous risk. So, again, you have to consider not just the agricultural products themselves, but the raw materials that go into them. Again, we think back a several years when the Russians invaded Ukraine. This question also came up under the sanctions regime. What happens when the major suppliers of the raw materials, like fertilizer, what happens when they're not available on the market? This was another major lasting impact of Russia's invasion, and we're going to see that multiplied exponentially here with the Strait of Hormuz closure. Another another item that I think, or commodity or resource that really doesn't get too much attention with regard to the Strait of Hormuz is water. It's simple. It's just look at the map. Do those countries in the Middle East have their own water? How does Dubai get its water? How does fresh, clean drinking water get to the rich elite scum in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, and these other places? They import water. Most of that water, it's not coming through pipelines, it's coming on ships, and they're going through the Strait of Hormuz. So, what happens when the rich, wealthy elites of Dubai realize there's no water? We're running out of water. So again, you got to think in the full spectrum of trade here. These countries, especially these monarchies in the Middle East, they're entirely dependent on this trade. They cannot exist without it. Why do you think they're scrambling so desperately to bring this war to an end as quickly as possible? It's not just all the billionaires that are fleeing Dubai, that's a part of it, but it's also the fact that they cannot survive without control of that strait, without commercial shipping. So, lots more to talk about in this regard, but I will leave it there for now. I want you to think as you take away from this video. I want you to think about some of the other things that you need, that you depend upon on a daily basis, that might be flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, and what happens if all of those shipping lines have to be reorganized and modified so that they can stay away from a war zone. Think about the costs. Think about what insurance companies may or may not want to do for those container ships going through war zones. If there's no insurance and the US government and the US military can't guarantee their safety, well, they ain't shipping. So lots more on that, but I will leave it there. Patreon.com/Eric Draitser. If you're not already a subscriber, you can find my work there. You can find some of my work on Counterpunch as well, and YouTube, etc. Subscribe, like, do all that stuff that people always harangue you about. Talk to you all again real soon. Peace out.